Friends who frequently visits us, and he's a regular contributor to a local philosophy journal called Philosophy Share and other academic texts. Yep.
Good morning. I wish to begin by thanking Professor Samak for her eloquent introduction to the conference. Thank you so much. And also I'd like to extend my thanks to Professor Manjan and his capable team for putting this conference together. It's been long, too long. Because of the pandemic, we took a break, and it is so nice to be back. It's so nice to be in person as well. My talk will touch on some of these topics. It is somewhat related to the pandemic, and I'm going to try not to read, just to talk to this more informally, and also to leave ample time for discussion, because I'm curious, what kind of questions people might have. So, talking about touch, when we think about what touch can be, there's a fairly long list, and this is by no means full-fledged list of various things that touch can be. It can, as I said, can be reassuring or threatening or inviting or so many other things. So it seems to me that we're able to do so many things with touch, and yet to this day we seem to be not really able to understand what touch is. So what is touch? I call this gap the explanatory gap. On the one hand, we seem to be able to do, as I said, a lot with touch. On the other hand, we barely know what it is. There is a fairly recent resurgence of interest and research in touch in both analytic and continental tradition. I've been talking to some of the friends and colleagues here, and I'm understanding that what I'm talking about, for example, I'm going to miss some of the key contributions to this topic, Butler notably, Derrida as well. Keep in mind that my angle is mostly analytical, so bear with me. There's a little bit of a bias here and a gap too, if you wish. How do we define touch? What is it? In your smartphone, I'm pretty sure that you realize that there is something that they refer to as haptics. It's right in your pocket, and it buzzes, it shakes, and this is just the beginning. This is very rudimentary. The technology is moving in the direction of integrating haptics in technology. Where is this going to take us? Maybe we could discuss it during the question period. I think there's a wide range of opportunities and possibilities when it comes to the haptic touch. The problem is, or haptic meaning active touch, that when we talk about defining it, is that it's not just skin. There are many other parts of our body that sense touch. It could be, some of our muscles or ligaments or whatever else, tongue. There's many parts of our body, so not just skin. So to locate it is difficult. It seems to be all over. Plus, touch really does not have, like so many of the other senses, it's sort of what I call its primary modality or phenomenological foundation. because when we touch, there are various things that can occur there. There is the layers of this phenomenon. It could be texture, it could be temperature, it could be solidity, many other things that may concern us. So, I do think there's some hope that this gap may be bridged. There is, of course, because of the pandemic, a renewed interest in what has the absence of human proximity done to people? How has it alienated people in some ways? How has it affected mental health, general health, and so on and so forth? Plus, I just briefly referred to interactive technology, which again is prompting a renewed research in haptics. When I looked into this, I sort of I picked Aristotle and I picked Wittgenstein because they will be the ones where there's some mention or at least some discussion of touch. At the same time, I am aware that, for example, there are traditions, there are approaches in philosophy where touch is figuring really prominently. For example, feminism, the interest in the body has many aspects: social, cultural, political, ethical, and the touch seems to be primordial. It is the first means of contact that a newborn baby has, prior to any other sense. So in that sense, it seems to be very deeply embedded. And medical research really has a lot of interest in this. Aristotle, when he wrote on touch, I found that in the book 35 of his problems, he wrote on tickling. So that was his approach. That he noted some things that I kind of go with as well. Wittgenstein, most people would know this. Refers to itch and scratch. So, I think, of course, he meant this, it's very cryptic. You can interpret it in various ways. I'm not going to go into that, in the interest of time. Aristotle, says something about touch when he says, when someone else touches us, why is it that we shudder more than when we touch ourselves? What's that? And his argument is that, it seems, at least this is my take on this, that, that what is connected with the sense organ is imperceptible. So for us, we're sort of unable to kind of set back and understand touch because it's too close to us, so to speak. It's very hard to individuate it. So this is becoming a bit of a topic for analytic philosophy, individuating touch. And of course, there's some fairly easy, like off-the-cuff objections, masturbation, like, maybe a counter-argument to Aristotle. In a more recent philosophy, what we find is a book by Richard Kearney that he published just, I believe it's last year. It's titled Touch. So, what he does there is pretty fascinating, and it would probably take me the whole talk to kind of unpack a lot of the stuff that that Kearney is saying. He's talking about excarnation, for example, which is a concept where, roughly defined, a process of replacing the flesh with the image. So this is happening in the modern technology. So I guess, probably the most radical consequence of this would be to say that this would reverse old, ancient distinction between simulacra and reality in Plato in the 21st century. It's such a huge claim. Like, if people want to maybe discuss some of this in the question period, I'd be more than happy. As well, what is of particular interest to me, I'm interested in philosophy of technology. What could be referred to as instantaneous communication, that means of sharing information and means of communicating. It seems that some of this, a huge consequence of this, means of instantaneous communication is paradoxically alienation and loneliness. Instead of bringing people together, there's a book published maybe 10, 15 years ago, Alone Together, that explores this phenomenon. It is becoming a well-known phenomenon. So in her book, Erotic Morality, Linda Haller, an American philosopher, makes it a very similar point, where she's saying that rapid means of communication, ironically, distance people instead of bring them together. Touch, since it is so holistic and it seems to be so non-localized, referring back to Aristotle, to be imperceptible, seems to hold a lot of power. It seems that touch is capable of being brought to the forefront, and it seems to be capable also of replacing some of the other senses. For example, we had a recent severe storm in the Atlantic Canada called Fiona that devastated the island where I live. It was the worst storm in Canadian history, and it brought back home this. I can illustrate it just through this situation, where when you don't have lights, you don't have electrical power, what happens? A lot of times you refer to touch. You use it, and it can replace many other senses, vision especially. Another point of interest here is that not only touch, but also what I call near touch is a topic worth exploring. What does close proximity mean? What consequences does it have? What does it do? And also, what does it do when it's removed as well? I kind of, thinking about this, using an informal example, I thought of the song, Don't Stand So Close to Me by the Police. Some of us, I guess, probably would have been there in the early 80s when it was popular. This song explores what you might label near touch, and in this sense, there is a whole layer of implications where there is there's guilt, there's inappropriate attraction, there's all of these things that are culturally significant. So, you know, if you look this up, what turns out to be the case is that a sense of how close you are to someone, it may be culturally relative. And there's the discipline proxemics, a study of interpersonal space, where it is shown that the scope of proximity often correlates with the population density. So, you know, there's some, you know, I can go into that later on if you wish, where, you know, what is an appropriate distance in some cultures is not the case in some others. You know, very noticeable if you travel. So my hope is that this explanatory gap that ought to be closed and appears to be closing. It's the interest in haptics that I already referred to. It's the interest in philosophy as well, and a recent interest in touch, that in particular the intersection between philosophy and cognitive science, that a lot of this research is housed. However, I would like also to suggest that touch ought to be more fully integrated in the future models of ethics. And you know, there are plenty of resources for humanity to draw from this. And I think, you know, up to this day, it has been poorly used, and it definitely has been marginalized. So I think we need to listen to the voices that so far have been marginalized in the mainstream ethics literature. You know, for example, this is how Linda Hogg characterizes what she calls mindful touch. I'm quoting from her book. So what it means is to make the time and space to be, to breathe, to feel, to stay in mindful touch with the consequences of our actions. And in particular, you know, this expression, the consequences of our action. Since, you know, what can happen many times, technology, it removes humanity from the consequences of what has been done. You know, I hate to use gruesome examples, you know, yet, you know, when a drone is used, as sadly we see, as it's been used as we speak, whoever is using it uses technology to remove themselves from the consequences of their action. They don't see whom they killed and destroyed, and what are some of these tragic consequences. So, you know, I'm not making some sort of a Luddite point here, obviously. At the same time, I think just the awareness of this, the awareness of what it means to be in proximity to our feeling, to nearness to the other, is very important, very relevant, in my opinion, for any future model of ethics. So, what would be some of the virtues that we could potentially list in this type of ethics that would be empowered and motivated, fueled, if you wish, by touch, as a platform, as I don't want to say a method, because I really don't know yet, you know, how would this enter a method in ethics. However, I can see all kinds of very important virtues. So I listed, you know, this is by no means a complete list. Connectedness, presentness, empathy, respect, care for the fellow human beings, care for the entire planet. And, I think in particular, the last 2 points are made abundantly relevant in the world that we live today, where, we ought to be conscious, we ought to know that, many times what the modern technology is doing, it is alienating us, it is removing us, it is boxing us in, it is putting us in a place where the screen, many times is a shield. You'll see this, especially with young people, if they want to establish a disconnect. I'm sure you've had this experience. I'm talking to you, but I'm not really talking to you because I'm shielding myself by the screen. The danger of not developing some sense of this type of ethics that is steeped in touch, that is aware of the magnitude of this sense and how important it is, and that it must not be ignored. I think it's something that is really relevant for the future, in my opinion, for the future of ethics. And it will be something relatively new. I mean, there are people who have written about this, obviously. However, I think a lot of it is still not sufficiently explored. Never mind the fact that we can barely define it, and that we're still grappling to understand what it is. So all of this coming together may result in some new directions when it comes to the future of ethics. Thank you so much.